from one of the most famous and clearly most ostentatious palaces in the world. Well, one of them, one of probably five, but I am out at the Chateau of Versailles, of course, built by and for Louis XIV. I'm sure he didn't spend much time picking up a hammer and nails, but of course he was known as the Sun King. And there are symbols all through it that look like a sun. Of course, they represent him. In fact, you can see it around the front of the palace here. So this is a Monday, and so the palace is actually closed. And I did try and do a Facebook Live, and then it failed twice. So I thought I'd just give you a little video here, ladies and gentlemen, to give you a sense of this palace and just sort of the nature, the history of just how incredibly ostentatious and, of course, hierarchical France was, which led, of course, almost a direct line to the revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and, of course, then to the rise of Napoleon and the system of emperors. But now, this is an overall quite healthy democracy. There's the Sun King right there in the middle. It's pretty remarkable to see, isn't it? So the regal symbols all through. It belongs to the state of France now. Versailles Palace as of I think 1995. But work's going on. There's work all over. Well, there's work all over the world too. I think post-pandemic. But look at that up there. Say, toutes les gloires de la France, to all of the glories of France. And of course, this kind of monarchical system is an awful lot. Well, it's almost exactly like fascism, really. And one can understand that after Louis and his whole regime left Paris because of being afraid from uprisings. So they leave Paris, they come out here, they build all of this, and they centralize all the power of France in around this one city of Versailles. Interestingly enough, this was also, to this day, is an extremely centralized country. You know, the concentration of the presidential power and the governance here in Paris, quite different from regional governments that we have elsewhere in the world. So it is an interesting conversation to have about France from that point of view. So, for example, I've just come back from Brittany, and the Breton language is now a highly at-risk Celtic language, but it doesn't have a national status. So interesting conversations. But when they did centralize the government out here, they started building this in 1661, and basically the whole power of France moves up to try and curry favor with the Sun King himself, and so the regions were kind of left to their own. And of course, in Paris itself, life is pretty miserable. You know, Paris is indisputably, you know, one of the most beautiful cities in the world by many, many measures. But of course, it wasn't until the 1700s that Haussmann, 1800s that Haussmann came in and really leveled so many of the old kind of medieval neighborhoods and put in the great boulevards that Paris is known for. Now, I'm sure they didn't spend a lot of time asking for permission to do that. There's another toutes les gloires de la France up there, and you see the gold leaf. So let's wander down. Now, this was a planned city, Versailles. When I say a planned city, of course, you have the palace here, and you have the spokes, the lanes going out, and the design of Washington, D.C. was based on Versailles as well, which is very interesting. But of course, it was all about regal glory. These fabulous buildings out in the front in the distance are all the stables of the kings, and so probably they were the best treated horses around too, I would imagine. And of course, at the time of Louis XIV, travel was by horse-drawn wagon. It was pre-industrial revolution, pre-trains, and so whilst they were living in splendid splendor, and I couldn't imagine just how life in the palace must have been, the competition for attention and hierarchy. Oh my goodness me, that is not a period of history that I'd like to go back and live in, but it is fascinating. And of course, France was the great European power in the West for much of that period, of course, almost continuously at war, particularly with England. Of course, the Act of Union between England and Scotland was later on in the 1700s, 1707, I believe. But through this period of time, 1600s, with Louis right up into the 1700s, of course, was the establishment of New France, many of the different colonies, and of course, those colonies in the Caribbean, where sugarcane was raised in what is now Haiti and Dominican Republic, and created great wealth for France, but also just so deeply involved in the history of enslavement. So it is all heavy stuff. Versailles is, and of course, all the great artists and sculptors and so forth of the entire kingdom ended up here. So on the inside, from an artistic point of view, there are tidbits, there are bits that are just incredible, but the opulence is so far over the top. And it is a bit of a reminder, I think, when we concentrate far too much wealth in just a few hands, boy, oh boy, does that have a very clear effect on a broader society, and eventually leads to uprising. So let's just go through this little security check here, and I'll go up and I'll show you Louis XIV himself, and then at least we'll have a little video from here. Not to put the camera right in people's faces. Right? So just go through here. Merci. Au revoir. I do find for a country that gets so many millions of tourists, the service is overall excellent in France still. And it was very easy to come up here. I'm actually just parked right over here, so that was not a big challenge at all, which is good news. But of course, the famous statue out in the distance is himself, Louis XIV. So let's go up and have a little peek at the King of France there, the Sun King. And of course, you know, his bust was all over the country, the empire, and so forth. There's a bust of him in the Place Royale in Quebec City, of course, as well. But this is a very, very green city, Versailles. You can certainly see why there's a good quality of living in this city. And there, with the equestrian buildings either side, it actually says Écurie du Roi, so the king's stables either side. But wow, I've been coming to Versailles for as long as I came here as a tourist, of course, probably when I was 17 years old, but I brought groups here for years, and they'd always have a local guide going inside, and I didn't even bother going through after a few times. You know, you go from one room to another, festooned with gold and so forth. It actually sort of stops being, at least to me, interesting after a while. But there is Louis XIV, and this is, they call it the equestrian statue of Louis XIV right here. But let's just make our way up around to the front and have a little peek at him and look back. Anyone who was on my Facebook Live, I'm sorry that I cut out. It's been a bit of a frustration over here in Europe every time I've been trying to do live things. But I'll keep working on it. But there we go. And there is Louis XIV, right there. Roi de France et de Navarre. Navarre was at that time, of course, that is a province of Spain, in 1643 until 1715. So it was a long legacy. And it's hard to say how many of the actual decisions he made during that whole reign. But I mean, he managed to, through his handlers or himself, concentrate all the power in that building we see up behind us right there. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me. Here, I'll give everyone a quick hello. Kind of selfie with Louis XIV. We don't really look very similar at all. But thank you for coming along and joining me for this little video. And I'm sorry that live on Facebook didn't work this time, but oh well, we'll keep working at it. So peace and love, ladies and gentlemen. Let's not let the world get concentrated to just a few rich people. It's maybe a little too late.